What's the worst coworker you've ever worked with? My coworker likes to initiate conversations, then does long pauses, where you go to say something back, then he cuts you off and keeps talking. He has entire conversations almost entirely by himself. He also likes to make changes to my paperwork before it's turned in, ends up riddled with spelling mistakes, while he tries to make the content look smarter. Fortunately it's all electronically stamped with who made revisions. Fast food. Third shift. The only other employee stayed in the bathroom doing blow. Worked with a girl who would sometimes just lay on the floor and play on her phone. She would routinely flip out about something her boyfriend did and just start screaming curse words, sometimes in front of customers. She was eventually fired for smoking weed while on the clock. I had a manager once who dumped trash on my desk my third day there. She said it was to remind me that taking out the trash was part of my job description. It wasn't. I was a research assistant at a mortgage firm. Not necessarily a coworker, but my old supervisor literally told me not to think, even if it's wrong, that I do things her way, and not to ask questions, because I should already know what to do. I had just gotten the position. When I was an intern, there was this old shrew who would call people into her office. My cube shared a thin wall, gossip, then call those people in to tell them what was said, etc. She would try to frame people for shit she did wrong. She was so arrogant, and she refused to adapt to workforce modernization. Example, she refused to learn how to hyperlink in emails, documents, etc. A real ray of sunshine she was. My worst coworker was one I worked with when I was a cashier at Walmart. She approached me and asked me to cash out her paycheck. I was still new at the job and never got training on how to do that function. She was sympathetic, so she walked me through how to do it. Transaction over and done. I go on about my day. I get called back a couple of days later by my managers and they circled me in an office and accused me of stealing. After tears, videotapes, and telling them what happened, they told me that apparently this coworker of mine had stolen not only from me, but several other people that day as well. They just wanted to confirm I wasn't in on the deal. Fuck Walmart, and fuck that bitch for almost getting me arrested. Hired a cook on a good recommendation. He was just fine the first 2 weeks. Then I noticed food going missing. Then supplies started going missing. Then a customer told me that he had been adding auto 30% tips as food purchases. When I looked at the books, I saw that he had been adding 30% tips to all the credit card sales. And the cash rings were off from what should have been sold. I fired him that day. The next day he came in and apologized. Said he was on drugs and was going to rehab. I wished him well. Then next day he tried to break in after close and was caught. Idiot. This is about 15 years ago, but the office I worked in instituted a scent-free policy. One woman, who was already insufferable, was so offended by it that she snuck in her perfume collection. She'd walk down the halls and spray perfume into empty offices or cubicles when no one was looking, or before everyone arrived in the morning. This went on for well over a month or two, and we had no idea who was responsible. My coworkers and I started referring to this mysterious person as the channel bandit. She was finally caught on camera in the act. She'd left for 3 weeks vacation and was unaware that we had installed cameras after a break-in. Some of us already suspected her, as the channel bandit mysteriously stopped spraying while she was away. She quit right after she was caught. None of us were sad to see that cedar-scented psycho leave. I've worked a lot of factories, but one I worked at was mainly for felons. They pay you complete shit and work you so hard it tears you body and mind up. I just graduated high school, and it was my second factory, so I didn't know any better. One guy I work with, we nicknamed Big Matt, since we already had another Matt. Well, Big Matt was a big fan of crystal and steroids, so the dude was absolutely jacked, but this 35-year-old lived with his mom. He said it had to do with him being a kid and walking and her being raped, and ever since then he never wanted to leave her alone. At the time I thought, wow, that would explain the substance abuse. He just wants to be strong to protect her. Well, I was a fucking idiot. 2 months later, Big Matt and 2 coworkers didn't show up, so I asked the supervisor what happened, but he didn't know either. Next day one of the coworkers came in and told us that all 3 had been arrested because after buying an O of weed, Big Matt's mom called the cops on them. So before the cops showed up, Big Matt, a 6 foot some odd inch buff meth head, beat his mother within an inch of life for calling the cops on him. Next day I looked him up, and sure enough he was booked in a local prison. Suppose that has to be the worst coworker out of all the ones I faced. He would walk in every day, like it was his first day, with no memory of anything we showed him the previous day. He was only focused for the first 30 minutes, then the rest of the time would be on his phone and try to work with one hand, which is bad because I work in a restaurant. Can't cook with one hand, but that didn't stop him from trying. Then one day he just stopped showing up for like a week, then was confused when he came back and was fired. This guy named Daniel I used to work with at McDonald's in high school. He let everyone know he worked out and enjoyed being on the football team. He had this thing about taking 5 shits a day. He would walk by on his way back from the toilet, chest out, shoulders back, and triumphantly announce, "That's shit number 3, fucking Daniel." I worked with a guy that regularly googled everyone we worked with. He knew information about the apartment we had just sold and told everyone at our department meeting how much we sold for. He creeped the fuck out of all the girls at work, and then it came out he had stalking and sexual assault charges pending outside work. Fired that day. I work with this guy that tries to convert people to his religion every day. It's super annoying. I worked with a guy who couldn't learn new skills. When he started he had to learn new programs and processes, just like anyone would at almost any job. He couldn't pick up on it, whether it was where to click in a software to get a certain result or how to fill out a report. Everyone on my team took turns showing him the ropes and it never sunk in. I remember being so frustrated because he could not figure out how to minimize a window. Top right corner, click on the straight line. It took like 3 to 4 seconds for him to drag the mouse to the corner, and then he'd hover around it, but never on it. Super nice guy, but impossible to work and collaborate with on projects because so much time was wasted. My old supervisor. She was that special brand of too nice. Laughing was her nervous tick, and hoo boy, it was constant. She was incapable of being assertive, which is not the best quality for someone whose job is telling other people what to do. The best she could do was be passive aggressively nice when she really needed something done, which just made everyone dislike her. I worked with a guy who'd interrupt any conversation to talk about anything as if he was the expert. And I don't use anything as a hyperbole. He truly had something to say about anything, including things he had never heard of or obviously didn't know much about. When the subject being discussed was something in the category of things he didn't know much about, he would slowly steer the conversation away from the original discussion to something he would like to talk about at the moment. It was both amazing and the most annoying thing I had ever had to deal with. He was like that Wikipedia game where you start with Star Wars and somehow end up on LGBTQ+ struggles. Not to mention the conversation was basically 98% of him just talking non-stop. Everybody else was way too polite and against conflict to say anything, including me, so most people just tried to stay away from him, but he'd follow people around. I eventually left, but I even remember having a nightmare where he was the best man at my wedding. I'm pretty cool about people all have their role to play, but one time we had a secretary that would microwave eggs and can tuna every morning in a bowl. Now, I'm not a violent person, but the smell generated from microwaved eggs and canned tuna is downright repulsive by anyone's standards. One of my favorite things about being in the military was that your pre-military status did not matter. Everyone wears the same uniform and you'd never know if your favorite military leader came from privilege or squalor. The uniform, for all of its drawbacks, is an objectively effective unifier. It levels the playing field. looking the same as everyone else challenged me to ensure that my work ethic and ideas created opportunities, not some predetermined status. I had a peer who was better than all of that. He didn't do the work unless it interested him, we didn't do interesting things, and constantly complained that our work was below him. On more than one occasion, he tried to pay for others to do his work for him. His entire point of being in the military was to prove to his father that he could earn something, and sought to accomplish that by claiming he'd already earned it. Fuck that guy. His name was Dan. Dan was 37, working at a dead-end job as a lab specimen processor in a windowless room for 9 hours a day. He ate only Burger King, but without the lettuce, because that's rabbit food. He drank literally a gallon of Mountain Dew a day and was confused as to why people were horrified by that. There's water in it, he would say. Apparently if he ate corn he would vomit and have to go to the hospital. He would tell me he firmly believed that man and dinosaur roamed the earth at the same time, along with many other theories that came from his gut. One day we got into a political argument before the 2016 election where he said, if Bernie Sanders is elected president, there will be a civil war, and I will not hesitate to kill you and your family. Dan was fired. I got out of there as soon as I could. Don't be like Dan. I have a coworker who's very old-fashioned and strongly believes that males and females cannot be friends. Well, it just so happens that my manager and I, a male and a female, happen to get along quite well because of our similar ages and interests. She reported me to the other managers for it and accused me of sleeping with him. Back when I worked at a restaurant I was friends with the bartender, chill dude. Right up until they made him manager, and that small amount of power and increase in pressure made him so angry all the time. He screamed at me that I was shit at my job because I didn't do a thing that I've never been asked to do before. He made me miss my last bus so I couldn't get home. It was pitch black outside and I cried on the bench outside the restaurant. Worst working day and worst co-worker. It took me a long time to get over that and realize I wasn't a shit worker. He was just stressed and didn't know how to handle it, I suppose. A guy that was on the keto diet, it's all he'd ever talk about. He once overheard a conversation I was having with a colleague on a particularly stressful day. He interrupted us to suggest I give up carbs in order to reduce my stress levels. He was a complete utter moron. He was incompetent in every way, but the icing on the cake was when he tried to put one of the pickup trucks into gear with the wiper stick and called me an idiot when I told him it was the wrong lever. He just wouldn't work. Just wouldn't. This was in a research lab. He was a visiting researcher from another country, and he spent a lot of time asking tons of non-work related questions, to the point of disrupting others' work. In the course of a year, he designed one very basic experiment, and didn't actually do it. Just designed it. He was above doing bench work apparently. He picked fights with everyone doing any experiment related to the one he was planning, because he didn't want to have to share credit for anyone. He wouldn't clean up after himself, wouldn't pick up things from the floor. He actually called me in from another room, because he wouldn't take a stringless tea bag out of his mug. Also on a different occasion, because he'd knocked some things off a hanger on the back of the door, and for whatever reason wouldn't pick them up. It was kind of like working with a child. He must have had servants where he lived. I don't know how, but he was there for his PhD. Boss fired him. He was one of 2 people in her 30+ year career that she'd ever fired. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to consider the idea to maybe think about potentially subscribing. Peace.